Everyone always wants to know what's the best rain gear for hunting. And this is a very difficult question to answer for two different reasons. Number one, what style of rain gear do you want? A light rain jacket or a heavy rain jacket? And there's pros and cons of both that I'm not going to get into on this video, but that produces a difficult question right out of the gate. Now, the second reason this is a difficult question to answer comes down more to the testing. Rain gear is very difficult to test under real-world applications. We're going to get into waterproof ratings and breathability ratings later on. We can talk about suitor tests and other ways that companies and manufacturers test their rain gear and the kind of failings of these mechanisms and how they're hard to replicate. And each company kind of has their own way of coming up with those ratings for themselves, so they're not super comparable between each other and the difficulty that possesses. But there's also lots of challenges with testing rain gear in real world situations. Number one, when you're hiking, you sweat a lot. So it's very difficult to tell when you stop, is the moisture, inside my rain gear from water that leaked in from outside, or is it from sweat that I created from the inside? Number two, you're usually wet when you put rain gear on. Like, you wait for it to start raining a little bit because maybe this is going to pass, and then you realize it's kind of picking up a little bit. Like, nope, I better put my rain gear on. So again, am I wet from the rain that started, or am I wet from water that the rain gear let in? And then finally, your testing situations are always different. It's never raining to the same degree. You're never hiking with the same activity level, the temperature, the ambient humidity. All of these things change, and all of these things will affect the performance of your rain gear. So being able to produce replicable testing environments proves very challenging. Now, I have been running the Stone Glacier M5 for the last 2 years. And this year in particular, I had 3 particular use cases where I had the opportunity to really test it under replicable conditions, where I was testing the actual waterproofness of the document. I was on a horseback hunt in Wyoming where it rained and snowed significantly. I did some late season mule deer hunting where I was doing a lot of quadding in like a sleet, real heavy, wet snow. And finally, I did a lot of rafting while I was guiding moose hunters this year, and we had a ton of rain during moose season. So I had a lot of opportunity to sit in that boat and get rained on. And in all 3 of those situations, I had the ability to test how waterproof this jacket really was. And not straight out of the box, but after wearing this jacket, pretty regularly over the course of hunting over the last 2 years, which I think gives you a more realistic appraisal of its long-term durability and waterproofness, as opposed to just taking something out of the package and testing how waterproof it is. So now that I've had the ability to test this jacket that thoroughly, what are my final thoughts and recommendations, and how do I think this jacket stacks up against other rain jackets that I've used? Before we get into that, 2 little bits of housekeeping. If you like what I do here at Mindful Reviews and you appreciate the unsponsored, unbiased content, I would greatly appreciate if you would become a member and support this community at mindful-reviews.com. And I'm going to sweeten the pot for you a little bit. Between now and December 15th, anyone who joins Mindful Reviews will automatically be entered to win my Prime RVX 34 compound bow. I recently did a review on that bow, which you can watch right here, and I go over the giveaway details. But essentially, all you have to do is join Mindful Reviews between now and December 15th. That's mindful-reviews.com. Second piece of housekeeping, I have now officially launched Mindful Hunter Outfitting. So I am offering archery, mule deer hunts in Alberta, and any weapon spring black bear hunts in British Columbia. I would love to help curate your next Canadian hunting adventure. So if you have any interest in either of those hunts, please drop me an email, j@mindfulhunter.com. Now, as we walk through each of these categories, I thought it would be useful to compare it against another jacket that I've got a lot of experience with over the last few years, and that is the Sitka Dew Point. It's not a completely apples to apples comparison because the Dew Point falls into that light/ultralight category, and the M5 fits into that medium/heavyweight category. However, I still think there's some useful things that we can learn from putting them through the comparison. So as far as price goes, the M5 is $329 US and the Dew Point is $349 US. Now weight is where they really start to separate. A large version of the M5 comes in at 604 grams or 21.5 ounces. And the dew point comes in at 387 grams or 13.8 ounces. So there's almost 7 ounces difference between the two. And so to put that in an easy to understand fashion, the M5 weighs basically 1.5 times what the dew point weighs. Now, as far as material goes, there's essentially 3 categories that rain gear falls into: 2-layer, 2.5 layer, and 3-layer. Most rain gear these days is going to be 3-layer construction. So you basically have an outer layer, an inner layer, and then a permeable laminate in the middle. I'm not going to do a deep dive on how rain gear works, but you essentially need this semi-permeable membrane that has holes big enough to allow water vapor to be evacuated from the inside to the outside, hence retaining some level of breathability, but small enough that they won't allow water droplets to come from the outside to the inside. And a lot of how this is facilitated is through pressure. Like when you generate body heat, that vapor has a certain amount of pressure and it's forcing outwards. So you can force that vapor through the semi-permeable membrane. And then when the water falls, it doesn't have that same pressure. So it's not forced through the jacket. This is why jackets operate very differently when you're in heavy brush circumstances, because when you're pushing past the brush, that pressure can force those water droplets through that semi-permeable membrane. Also, you'll notice when you're wearing a backpack, normally your rain gear will start to fail wherever your backpack straps are or wherever your hip belt is. And that's because the water's getting down in between your jacket and the straps and hip pad, and then that pressure from your backpack can force that through. This is why no jacket is, if it has any level of breathability, it is not 100% waterproof. The only 100% waterproof rain gear is fully rubberized rain gear, and it has a breathability rating of 0. It doesn't let any moisture out. So the problem with that is you would just sweat your ass off. Now, that being said, both these jackets have a 3-layer construction. Obviously, Sitka, being owned by Gore, is made with Gore-Tex. Stone Glacier doesn't reveal the patenting or the brand name of its 3-layer laminate, but they're both essentially using 3-layer laminates. As far as fit goes, I run XXL in both of these, but I find the Stone Glacier fits significantly larger than the Sitka. And I find that's true almost across the board. Like an XL of anything Stone Glacier fits me similar to a XXL of anything Sitka. All right, so up first, we're gonna try on the Stone Glacier. Now, you're gonna notice right away, the sleeves are very long, and I've got this draw cord really cinched down. This is the XXL is very large and very bulky. And when you first try it on, you think it's too big. However, after I cinch those draw cords at the bottom, zip it up and then kind of flip this under, and then take these Velcro straps and then tighten them up at the wrist a little bit. This is kind of how I like my rain gear to fit. Now this is a XXL. I'm 6'1", 235 pounds right now. Really nice hood on this. And it's got the additional draw cord here at the back, as well as draw cords in the front. So it really gives you the ability to articulate the shape of the hood. I hate hoods that block my peripheral view, and this one actually stays quite nice. Normally I like wearing a ball cap, and then I'll pull this up and it just kind of rides behind the brim of the ball cap. But overall, there's the fit of the Stone Glacier M5. Up next, we're gonna look at the dew point. Now, as soon as you pick this up, you can feel how thin it really is in comparison to the M5, which is why I said earlier, this is not an apples to apples comparison. And then you'll notice I don't have the sleeves tightened up at all. And see how the cuff comes right down to my wrist. The other one almost buried my whole hand. I don't have any, a little bit of tightness on this side here, but it's not nearly as long or nearly as bulky, which is why I say it's essentially one size smaller. These are both double XLs. This is probably exactly the size of an XL in the Stone Glacier. So again, do this one up. Tighten these. Yeah, the Velcro is much sturdier on the Sitka than it is on the Dew Point. So you can see it's a much more fitted, which to be honest, for an early season lightweight piece of rain gear is probably more realistic because I'm not going to be using it like I use this one for late season, putting it over puffies, that type of thing. Again, with the hood, it still has the drawstring at the back, but you'll notice there's no front drawstrings on the Dew Point, so it's not quite as articulating, and it does have a tendency to kind of crowd you out. It's not as shaped or contoured as the M5 is, but I mean, it still works. It's still decent, and it's got that one drawstring, which is enough. So yeah, there you go. Sitka Dew Point versus the Stone Glacier M5, fit and function. The reason I don't mind the Stone Glacier being a little bit extra baggy is that one of the things I like to do is wear my rain jacket over top of my puffy. I find it gives me a lot more temperature protection when I'm in those kind of late season situations. And so to have a rain jacket that goes over a puffy, it needs to be a lot bigger than a fitted rain jacket would normally be. So if I'm ordering rain jackets, I always err on the side of upsizing because I'd rather have more room underneath. Also, I find it helps the breathability. Like if I put on a rain jacket and it's sucked like right to my body and then I put my backpack on top of it, I find I sweat out a lot more easily than if I have a bulky rain jacket with a kind of lot of room underneath. I can leave it half unzipped and there's room for that kind of air to come out of the front zipper area. And just overall, I find it breathes better. Now, let's get into weather protection ratings and breathability ratings. Let's take a second and discuss how they actually derive a waterproof rating for rain gear or any other fabric. So what they do, and they have a machine that kind of replicates this, but essentially they take a 1 inch by 1 inch square of fabric, and then they have a tube that goes up from that fabric, and they see how high they can fill that tube with water until the pressure from that water starts to force the water through the jacket. So this jacket has a rating of 31,000 millimeters. So that means that you can have a fictional tube of water 31,000 millimeters above the jacket before it creates enough pressure to force it down through the jacket. Most of this testing is done with a device called a Suter machine. Now, these come in different rankings, and most rankings stop at 20,000 millimeters, and anything over 20,000 millimeters is considered to be extremely waterproof. Like that's what your high-end rain gear and all that kind of stuff aims to be over 20,000 millimeters. Now the Dew Point doesn't advertise a rating at all, so I'm not sure how it would compare. And again, I want to give a slight caveat, even with Stone Glacier's ratings, each company kind of has their own methodology for how they do this stuff. So it gives us a general idea of the waterproof rating, but it's not written in stone, and I wouldn't hang my hat on that rating. I'm currently working at borrowing a Suter tester so that I can run a bunch of different gear and fabric and kind of derive my own testing methodology and see, how waterproof different jackets are compared to each other using a similar machine. The other thing is if you change temperature, humidity, environmental conditions, any of that kind of stuff, it will change the ratings that you get out of those machines and those testing methods. So that's the other reason why they're not perfectly comparable across companies. But either way, extremely waterproof. Now let's talk about breathability. Now breathability is given in grams per square meter. So essentially what they do is they hold the fabric, in a controlled room. They expel vapor underneath the jacket, and then they measure over a 24-hour period how much vapor is able to move through the garment from the bottom to the top. And they measure that water vapor in grams, and then they express that in grams per square meter over a 24-hour period. And the Stone Glacier got 27,600 grams per square meter per 24 hours in vapor that was able to move through it. This is incredibly high. Again, most of the rating scales stop at 20,000, and anything over 20,000 is considered extremely breathable. So if we take Stone Glacier's word for it, which I have no reason not to, extremely high ratings for both waterproofness and breathability. Again, Sitka does not publish their waterproofness or breathability ratings. Finally, let's talk about durability. The M5 is a much heavier jacket than the Dew Point, so obviously it's more durable. However, I must say, I've been very aggressive with my Dew Point, bush bashing, hiking through all kinds of conditions, late season, early season, all kinds of stuff. I have 0 tears, 0 abrasions. There's been no wear points. It's held up extraordinarily well. Obviously, though, the M5 being significantly heavier is more durable, with one caveat. This just happened to me on my last hunt. I noticed that this Velcro enclosure here had started to come apart. Now, this is not the end of the world, and I'll probably just cut this one off or put a bit of crazy glue and kind of stick these two things back together. But when you review gear for a living, this is kind of the kind of stuff that you pay attention to. And if I was going to give Stone Glacier any feedback, I would say I would look at maybe running a line of thread up that Velcro enclosure, something like that, in case the adhesive lets go, just to keep those 2 layers attached moving forward. And then finally, let's look at wind protection, because I think a rain jacket is a much more versatile piece of gear than people give it credit for. You know, I've noticed a lot of people looking at some of these hybrid down jackets, like Sitka's coming out with this hyper down jacket, which is essentially like a very robust, very heavy puffy jacket. And one of my issues is that you can achieve a very similar performance by just pairing your rain jacket and your puffy. I think you can get the same temperature moderation, the same moisture evacuation properties. Like, I think they act very similarly, but you have almost more versatility because you have the ability to put together or take apart 2 pieces of gear that you already own instead of buying a completely new piece of gear. And I'll get into my final thoughts and conclusions in a minute, but the wind protection of the M5 greatly surpasses the wind protection of the Dew Point. And I want to talk about a very specific hunt that I went on over the summer in August, but it was very cold. I did a goat hunt, and I went in for 5 or 6 days on the first bit, came out and went back in for 5 or 6 days. Slightly different location, but same area of British Columbia, and had very similar weather conditions. And I took the Dew Point on the first one and the M5 on the second one. And I must say, when you're on those exposed ridge tops, the M5 just kept me significantly warmer than the Dew Point did. You really feel the kind of chill air coming through the Dew Point, and you do not feel that way with the M5. Now, at the beginning of this review, I talked about my testing and the kind of results that I had with it and the ability that I had to test this jacket in the quad, on the raft, and on horseback this year. And I can say that after running the M5 for 2 straight years, it was still 100% waterproof. Like, I got into the raft one morning at 6:30 in the morning, didn't get out until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It absolutely hammered rain all day. I got back to the truck, I took my jacket off, and I was literally bone dry underneath the jacket. And I was doing some rowing while I was in the raft, so generating some heat. All my, moisture was able to evacuate. Now, I wasn't wearing a backpack, and I find that's what kind of traps a lot of the moisture when you're in hiking situations, and that's why your base layers tend to get a little wet during those conditions. But I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt, it is extremely waterproof and breathable still 2 years deep. So the question is, if you could only buy one piece of rain gear, what would it be? And after looking at what I actually take with me when I go on a variety of hunts, I think if you were only going to buy one, I would say buy the M5. I still like owning both because when I am going on a sheep hunt or a goat hunt or any hunt where I'm going to be in there for 10 or 12 days, I don't care what the weather report says. There's always a chance when you're gone for that long that it might rain. And when I'm in those situations where I think it only might rain, I always take the dew point. I mean, it's under 14 ounces, so it's like not even a pound. So there's a very low penalty for bringing that with you. And then if it doesn't rain, no big deal. I've used it as part of my pillow before. I've used it for wind protection in the morning in order to stay a little bit warmer while glassing. Like, it's a very versatile piece of gear to have with you anyways, even if it doesn't rain. The fact that the M5 is a half a pound heavier, you definitely think twice about taking it. However, I do think it's the better all-purpose rain gear because when I get into that heavier, colder rain situations in late season, the dew point just doesn't provide the same temperature protection or the same weather protection that the M5 does. So that's kind of my thoughts in a nutshell. If you can only own one, I would go for the M5. If you have the funds, I still think having a piece of ultralight rain gear in the kit, like a dew point, definitely serves a role, but I think it's a bit of a luxury, not a necessity. All right, folks, there's my thoughts on the Stone Glacier M5. What piece of rain gear would you like me to review next? I'm working on doing kind of a large scale comparative review, but I actually think it's more worthwhile to do these kind of longitudinal reviews and then compare them all at the end. You know, there's some very big changes coming to the rain gear industry with these permanent chemicals being banned and new DWR technologies coming out of the market. I think for the next couple years, if I was you, I'd stock up on rain gear right now because when these things become illegal, I think we're going to hit a couple years where rain gear is going to kind of suck until they figure out a new chemical that can provide the same kind of performance that these older chemicals that are becoming illegal did. But that being said, I'd love to know what other pieces you want me to look at. So drop them in the comment section below. And again, if you want to win a Prime RVX 34 compound bow, all you need to do is join Mindful Reviews between now and December 15th. Mindful-reviews.com. And again, if you've got any interest in coming up to Canada and chasing archery, mule deer in Alberta, or any weapon, spring black bear in British Columbia, Mindful Hunter Outfitting is now live. I'd love to help you create your next Canadian hunting adventure. Jay@mindfulhunter.com. And if you guys could take a moment and engage with the content, like, comment, share, subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. And as always, thank you for tuning in.